In a dusty archive room in Berlin, buried beneath decades of bureaucratic records and forgotten paperwork, a researcher in 2006 stumbled upon a file that should have been destroyed 70 years earlier. The file was thin, barely 20 pages, and most of those pages had been heavily redacted with thick black lines obscuring entire paragraphs, but what remained visible was enough to send shockwaves through the small community of historians who study Nazi Antarctica expeditions. The file contained a partial transcript of a debriefing conducted in March of 1943, and the subject of that debriefing was a Kriegsmarine officer named Karl Unger, who had just returned from a mission to New Swabia, the German claimed territory in Antarctica. Before we dive into what that debriefing revealed, before we explore why it was supposed to have been destroyed, and before we confront the terrifying implications of what Officer Unger claimed to have witnessed beneath the Antarctic ice, I need you to do something. If you are ready to question everything you thought you knew about World War II, about Antarctica, and about what lies hidden in places where humans were never meant to go, then stay with me through every word of this investigation. And if you find this story as compelling and disturbing as I did when I first encountered it, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell, because this is part of an ongoing series that uncovers the most suppressed secrets of the 20th century. Share this with someone who understands that official history is written by those who control the archives, and that the truth often lies in the documents they tried to destroy, but failed to completely eliminate. Now let us begin with the man himself, Karl Unger, and the mission that would change his life and end his career. Karl Unger was born in Hamburg in 1912, the son of a merchant marine captain who instilled in him a love of the sea from an early age. He joined the German Navy in 1932, excelling in navigation and cold weather operations. By 1938, he had been transferred to a special operations unit whose activities were classified even within the military hierarchy. His personnel file, portions of which have been declassified, shows a gap in his service record from November of 1938 through February of 1939. It's a gap that corresponds exactly to the dates of the German Antarctic expedition commanded by Captain Alfred Richter. While Unger's name does not appear on the official crew roster of the expedition ship Neuschwabenland, documentary evidence suggests he was aboard as part of a security detail whose presence was kept off the public record. After that first expedition, Unger continued to serve in various capacities, but his assignments were always classified and his movements were tracked with unusual care by naval intelligence. In late 1942, he was assigned to submarine U-boat 537 under the command of Captain Peter Shrew. The submarine departed from Kiel in December of 1942 on what was officially logged as a standard patrol mission to the South Atlantic. But survivors of the submarine crew, interviewed decades later, told a different story. They said the submarine carried not weapons or supplies for extended patrol, but scientific equipment, drilling apparatus, and several civilian scientists whose identities were never recorded in official logs. The submarine's destination, they claimed, was not the South Atlantic, but Antarctica, specifically the region that Germany had claimed as New Swabia 5 years earlier. The submarine was gone for over 3 months, an impossibly long time for a standard patrol. When it returned to base in March of 1943, only half the crew was aboard. The others, including all the scientists, were listed as lost at sea with no details provided about how or where they died. Officer Unger was among those who returned, but he was immediately taken into custody by naval intelligence and transported to a secure facility outside Berlin. What happened during his debriefing over the next 72 hours is partially documented in the file that was discovered in 2006, the file that was supposed to have been destroyed, along with all other records of what came to be known internally as Operation Highjump 1, not to be confused with the American Operation Highjump that would occur 4 years later. The transcript begins without preamble, suggesting that the recording started in the middle of questioning rather than at the beginning. The first legible words, after several lines of redaction, are Unger's voice responding to a question that has been blacked out. He says, and I quote from the translated transcript, "I am telling you what I saw." Yet whether you believe it or not is irrelevant. It is there. It has been there for longer than any of us can comprehend, and we were fools to disturb it. The interrogator, whose identity is redacted throughout the transcript, asks Unger to start from the beginning to describe the approach to the Antarctic coastline and the entry into what Unger refers to as the interior warm zone. Unger's response is lengthy, and much of it has been redacted, but the parts that remain are extraordinary. He describes the submarine approaching the coast in January of 1943 and finding the entrance to a passage beneath the ice, an underwater tunnel large enough to accommodate the submarine with room to spare. The passage, he says, was not natural. The walls were too smooth, the dimensions too precise. It had been carved or melted through solid ice and rock by something with technological capability far beyond what 1940s human engineering could achieve. The submarine traveled through this passage for what Unger estimated as 6 hours, navigating by instruments alone, as no light penetrated the ice above. Eventually, the passage began to slope upward, and the submarine surfaced in what Unger describes as an underground lake or sea. When they opened the hatch and climbed onto the conning tower, they found themselves in a massive cavern, so large that their searchlights could not reach the ceiling or the far walls. The temperature in the cavern was warm, much warmer than the freezing Antarctic surface above. Unger estimated it at 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, warm enough to be comfortable without heavy clothing. But the warmth was not the most shocking aspect of the cavern. Unger describes seeing structures, buildings carved into the cavern walls, or freestanding on rocky shores around the underground sea. The structures were ancient, weathered by time, but still intact, and they were clearly artificial. The architecture, Unger says, resembled nothing he had ever seen or studied. The proportions were wrong, with doorways that were too tall and too narrow, with ceilings that were impossibly high, with staircases that had steps too deep for comfortable human use. Everything about the structures suggested they had been built by beings that were similar to humans, but not quite human, beings that were taller, with longer limbs, with different physical proportions. The interrogator interrupts at this point, and though his question is redacted, Unger's response makes clear what was asked. No, Unger says, we did not believe they were human constructions. The scientists believed they were looking at ruins built by something that predated human civilization, possibly by millions of years. But there was debate about whether the builders were extraterrestrial visitors or a terrestrial species that evolved before humans and either went extinct or retreated underground when the climate changed. The transcript indicates that the submarine crew and the scientists spent 3 days exploring the cavern system, mapping its extent and examining the structures they found. But their orders were more specific than mere exploration. They had been sent to find something that previous expeditions had detected or theorized about. Unger refers to it as the source, though he does not elaborate on what that means until later in the transcript. On the 4th day, following readings from instruments that the scientists had deployed, the team located what they believed to be the source. Unger describes it as an opening in the cavern floor, a vertical shaft that descended into darkness beyond the reach of their lights. The shaft was approximately 30 meters in diameter, and its walls, like the underwater passage they had used to enter the cavern system, were too smooth and uniform to be natural. Ropes were lowered into the shaft, and when they did not reach bottom after over 300 meters, the decision was made to use the drilling equipment they had brought with them to create a platform that could be lowered mechanically into the shaft. 2 scientists and 3 crew members, including Unger, should volunteer to make the descent. The transcript becomes heavily redacted at this point, with entire pages blacked out. What remains suggests that the descent took several hours and that the platform had to be stopped multiple times to allow the team to rest and to take measurements. Unger mentioned seeing passages branching off from the main shaft at various depths, tunnels that led horizontally into the rock. Some of these tunnels showed signs of intentional construction with smooth walls and regular dimensions. Others appeared more natural, though Unger notes that even the natural-looking passages seemed to follow patterns that suggested they had been modified or guided by intelligent design. At a depth that Unger estimates as 1,500 meters below the cavern floor, which would place it over 2,000 meters below sea level, the shaft opened into another cavern. This lower cavern was smaller than the one above, but still enormous, and it contained something that changed everything. Unger's description is fragmentary due to redaction, but he speaks of a structure, a facility, something that was clearly technological rather than merely architectural. He describes walls that were metallic or glass-like, surfaces that reflected light in ways that natural materials should not, and what he calls symbols or writing covering many of the surfaces. Most disturbing in Unger's account is his description of what the scientists found inside this facility. He speaks of chambers containing equipment that was still functional despite its obvious age, of panels that glowed when approached, of sounds like machinery operating deep within the structure. One of the scientists, yet whom Unger does not name but refers to as the elder of the group, believed they had found a power generation facility, something that had been running autonomously for thousands or millions of years, powered by geothermal energy or some other long-duration source. But what truly terrified Unger and his companions was not the facility itself, but what they found in a chamber deep within its core. The transcript is almost entirely redacted for the next several pages, but fragments remain that hint at the discovery. Unger mentions containers, preservation units, tanks filled with liquid. He uses the word specimens repeatedly, and in one unredacted fragment he states directly, "They were not human. They were similar, close enough that one might mistake them at a distance, but the proportions were wrong. They were too tall, too thin, and with limbs that were elongated beyond human norms. And their skulls, even in death, even preserved as they were, suggested a cranial capacity that exceeded ours significantly. The team spent only 2 hours in the lower facility before disaster struck." Unger's account of what happened is confused and contradictory, suggesting either that he did not fully understand the events or that trauma has distorted his memory of them. He speaks of one of the scientists touching a panel or activating a control that should not have been activated. He describes lights throughout the facility suddenly intensifying, of sounds changing pitch and growing louder, of the machinery that had been running at a low background hum suddenly accelerating as though powering up for some purpose. Yes, the team fled the facility and returned to the platform that had brought them down the shaft. As they ascended, Unger looked back and saw what he describes as the facility coming to life, with light spreading through sections that had been dark, with movement visible through transparent walls, with something that might have been automated systems activating throughout the complex. He could not tell if the activation was a response to their intrusion, a scheduled routine that happened to coincide with their presence, or something else entirely. But the scientists were unanimous in their belief that remaining in the lower cavern would be fatal, that something was happening that they did not understand and could not control. The ascent to the upper cavern took less time than the descent because the team was pulling themselves up the ropes rather than relying on the mechanical platform. But as they emerged into the upper cavern, they discovered that changes had occurred there as well. The temperature had increased noticeably, and some of the structures that had appeared dormant were now showing signs of activity. Lights were visible in windows that had been dark. Sounds echoed across the underground sea, mechanical sounds and something else, something that Unger describes as voices or signals, though he could not determine their source or meaning. The submarine crew had remained with the vessel, and when the exploration team returned, they reported that the submarine's instruments had detected seismic activity and temperature fluctuations throughout the time the team had been in the lower cavern. The captain made the decision to evacuate immediately, to return through the underwater passage to the open ocean while they still could. But as the submarine submerged and began its journey back through the tunnel, catastrophe struck. Unger's description of what happened is fragmented by redaction and by the clear emotional distress with which he recounts the events. He speaks of the tunnel collapsing, of sections of ice and rock falling and blocking the passage. The submarine was forced to reverse course and find an alternate route. In the process, they became lost in what Unger describes as a maze of interconnected passages. Some too narrow for the submarine to navigate, others leading to dead ends or to areas where ice blockages made passage impossible. For 3 days they searched for a way out, their air growing stale, their power reserves depleting, their crew approaching panic as it became clear that they might be trapped forever beneath the Antarctic ice. On the 4th day, following a passage that their instruments indicated sloped gradually upward, they found another exit to the open ocean. But this exit was not the same passage they had used to enter. It was in a different location, emerged in a different part of the Antarctic coast, and when they surfaced and took bearings, they discovered they were over 200 kilometers from where they had originally entered the ice. The implication was that the passage network beneath Antarctica was vast. It connecting different regions of the continent through a system of tunnels that might be partially natural, but had clearly been modified and expanded by whoever or whatever had built the facilities they had discovered. The submarine returned to base with half its crew missing. Unger's account of what happened to the others is contradictory. In some passages, he suggests they died during the tunnel collapse or were lost when the submarine had to navigate dangerous passages. In other passages, he hints that some of the crew refused to leave, that they had seen something or learned something that convinced them to remain in the caverns rather than return to the surface world. The interrogator presses him on this point repeatedly. But Unger's responses become increasingly evasive and eventually dissolve into a redacted section that spans multiple pages. What is clear from the unredacted portions is that Unger believed the mission had awakened something that should have remained dormant. He speaks of the facility continuing to activate, of systems that had been idle for countless millennia suddenly coming online. He expresses fear that the team's intrusion would have consequences, though he cannot articulate what those consequences might be. He mentions repeatedly that the elder scientist, the leader of the civilian team, had become convinced during the mission that the facility was not abandoned but was waiting, that its builders or their descendants or their automated systems were still present in some form, and that the team had triggered a response that could not be predicted or controlled. The interrogator's questions, though redacted, seem to focus on military applications of what was discovered. Unger's responses make clear that the scientists had collected samples, had documented what they found with photographs and drawings, and had removed several artifacts from the facility before the evacuation. But Unger also states that the elder scientist had warned against using any of the technology they had found, that it was beyond their understanding and that attempts to reverse engineer it would be catastrophic. The scientist had recommended that the facility be sealed, that its location be classified and never visited again, that humanity was not ready for what had been discovered. The debriefing transcript ends abruptly, mid-sentence. That's with Unger saying, "You do not understand what we have done." By going there, by activating those systems we have, and then the page ends. Whether subsequent pages existed and were destroyed, or whether the recording was terminated at that point, is impossible to determine. What is certain is that this was Unger's last official communication. His subsequent fate would remain unknown for over 60 years. The file discovered in 2006 contains not only the partial debriefing transcript, but also several memoranda and orders issued in the weeks following Unger's return. These documents reveal a coordinated effort to suppress all information about the mission and its findings. An order dated March 15, 1943, barely a week after Unger's debriefing. Yen commands the destruction of all records related to what is referred to only as the Southern Expedition. The order is signed by a high-ranking official in the Kriegsmarine whose name has been redacted, but the authorization codes suggest someone with direct access to the highest levels of Nazi leadership. A second memorandum, dated March 20th, indicates that all personnel involved with the expedition, including submarine crew members and the interrogators who debriefed Unger, were to be reassigned to different units and geographically dispersed. Contact between them was to be prohibited, and any discussion of the mission was classified as treason punishable by immediate execution. The memo notes that 3 individuals had already been executed for violations of this order, though it does not specify what violations they committed or whether any of those individuals were members of the submarine crew. Most chilling is a brief note dated March 25th that references Officer Carl Unger directly. The note states that the subject has been transferred to a medical facility for psychiatric evaluation and treatment for what is described as acute trauma and delusional ideation resulting from prolonged isolation. The facility is not named, and no further information about Unger's condition or treatment is provided. The implication is clear. Unger was being silenced, not through execution, but through institutionalization, declared insane, and locked away, where his testimony could be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. Yet this explains why Unger's name never appeared in post-war investigations of Nazi activities. When Allied forces captured German records at the war's end, they were looking for evidence of war crimes, weapons programs, and intelligence operations. An officer who had been institutionalized 2 years earlier for psychiatric reasons would not have attracted attention, especially if his records had been carefully sanitized to remove all reference to Antarctica or any activity that might have interested Allied investigators. Unger effectively disappeared from history, his story lost except for the fragments preserved in a file that should have been destroyed, but somehow survived in a Berlin archive for 63 years. The discovery of Unger's debriefing transcript would be merely a curiosity, and another strange footnote to the already mysterious history of Nazi Antarctic expeditions, if it stood alone. But it does not stand alone. Over the past 2 decades, other evidence has emerged that corroborates key aspects of Unger's account, suggesting that what he described was not delusion, but an accurate report of what he experienced. First, there is the matter of U-boat 537 itself. Naval records confirm that the submarine departed Kiel in December of 1942 and returned in March of 1943, an unusually long patrol for a vessel of that type. The official log, which was captured by Allied forces and is now available in archives, contains a gap of nearly 2 months during which no entries were recorded. The log resumes with a brief notation that the submarine engaged in extended operations in the South Atlantic and suffered mechanical difficulties that required repairs at sea. No details of these operations or difficulties are provided, and the lack of detailed daily logs for such an extended period is highly irregular and suggests the records were deliberately falsified or purged. Second, several crew members of U-boat 537 survived the war, and in the decades since, a few gave interviews or wrote memoirs. While none discussed the Antarctica mission directly, several made oblique references to a special operation they had participated in that they were forbidden to discuss. One crew member, interviewed in the 1980s when he was in his late 60s, stated that he had seen things during the war that he could not speak about, that he had been sworn to secrecy, and that oath still bound him even 40 years after the Third Reich's collapse. When pressed, he would only say that the submarine had gone somewhere it was never supposed to go, and had found something that was never supposed to be found. Third, declassified American intelligence documents from the immediate post-war period show that American authorities were intensely interested in German Antarctic activities. Reports from Operation Highjump, the massive American Antarctic expedition of 1946 through 47, include references to searching for evidence of German bases and facilities. While the official purpose of Operation Highjump was scientific research and training, the scale of the operation, yet involving thousands of personnel and significant military assets, suggests a more urgent mission. Some researchers believe the Americans were searching for whatever the Germans had found, that intelligence gained from captured documents or interrogated prisoners had revealed enough about the German discoveries to warrant a major investigation. Fourth, and perhaps most significantly, modern satellite and ground-penetrating radar surveys of Antarctica have revealed anomalies that match aspects of Unger's description. Massive cavern systems have been detected beneath the ice, warmed by geothermal activity and potentially containing liquid water lakes. Some of these caverns are large enough to contain structures the size of the ones Unger described. In several locations, a radar has detected what appear to be geometric formations beneath the ice, shapes too regular to be natural rock formations, while mainstream science attributes these to unusual geological processes. Their dimensions and arrangements are consistent with artificial construction. In 2009, 3 years after the discovery of Unger's debriefing transcript, a German researcher named Dr. Erika Schneider began investigating what had happened to Karl Unger after his institutionalization. Using the fragmentary information in the file and cross-referencing it with records of psychiatric facilities operating in Germany during the war, she identified 3 possible locations where Unger might have been held. 2 of those facilities had been destroyed during Allied bombing, their records lost. But the third, a facility in Bavaria, that had survived the war relatively intact and had continued operating until 1974, when it was closed and converted to other uses. Dr. Schneider obtained access to the facility's archived patient records, which had been preserved when the facility closed. She found Carl Unger's admission file, dated March 27, 1943, 2 days after the memorandum in the Berlin archive that referenced his transfer for psychiatric evaluation. The admission diagnosis was paranoid psychosis with delusional ideation. The notes describe Unger as experiencing vivid hallucinations about underground civilizations and ancient technology, as being convinced that he had discovered evidence of non-human intelligence, and as expressing fear that something catastrophic would result from his discoveries. The treatment notes, written by a Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann, who served as Unger's primary physician, paint a picture of a patient who was coherent, articulate, and consistent in his account of what he had experienced. Dr. Hartmann's early notes express skepticism about the diagnosis, suggesting that Unger's account, while extraordinary, did not present as typical delusional material. Delusions are usually fragmented and inconsistent, Hartmann noted, changing in response to questioning. Unger's account remained stable across multiple interviews and included technical details and specific observations that seemed incompatible with pure fabrication. But as the months progressed, the treatment notes changed in tone, and Hartmann began referring to Unger's testimony as clearly psychotic and describing treatment interventions designed to help the patient recognize the unreality of his delusions. The change coincides with a notation in Unger's file indicating that Hartmann had been visited by representatives from the Gestapo who provided guidance on the patient's treatment. After that visit, Unger was subjected to increasingly aggressive interventions, including electroshock therapy and high doses of sedatives that left him in a near-vegetative state for extended periods. The final entry in Unger's medical file is dated April 5, 1945, just days before American forces would overrun the region. The note states that the patient had been transferred to another facility due to the deteriorating military situation. But no destination is specified. Dr. Hartmann himself disappears from the historical record at this point, and efforts to trace his subsequent fate have been unsuccessful. Carl Unger's trail goes cold entirely. No death certificate, no post-war documentation, no evidence of what became of him exists in any archive that researchers have been able to access. Dr. Schneider's investigation uncovered one additional piece of evidence that adds a haunting coda to Carl Unger's story. In the psychiatric facility's archives, filed with Unger's medical records, was a collection of letters that Unger had written during his confinement. The letters were addressed to various individuals, including family members, former naval colleagues, and government officials. None of the letters had ever been sent, as they had been intercepted by facility staff and filed away, apparently as evidence of Unger's ongoing delusions. The letters span from April of 1943 through March of 1945, covering nearly the entire period of Unger's institutionalization. The early letters are pleas for help, insisting that he is not insane and that his imprisonment is intended to silence him. He begs recipients to investigate his claims, to send someone to Antarctica to verify what he found. He provides coordinates, detailed descriptions of how to locate the underwater entrance to the cavern system, and warnings about the precautions that should be taken when exploring the facility. But as the letters progress chronologically, their tone changes. Unger begins to express doubt about his own memories, at questioning whether what he experienced was real or whether he had indeed suffered some kind of breakdown. The electroshock treatments and medications are taking their toll, fragmenting his memories and making it difficult for him to distinguish between what he actually witnessed and what might be therapist-suggested false memories intended to help him recover. The final letters, written in early 1945, are the most disturbing. Unger writes that he has been having dreams or visions that he cannot explain, that he sees the facility he discovered activating fully, that he hears signals or calls that seem to emanate from beneath the ice. He wonders if somehow, despite being thousands of miles away and locked in a psychiatric ward, he is still connected to what he found in Antarctica. He describes feeling pulled, as though something is drawing him back, as though the mission is not complete and he is needed to finish what was started. One letter, dated March 19, 1945, just weeks before the final notation in his medical file, contains a passage that has troubled everyone who has read it. Unger writes, I understand now why they had to silence me. It was not to protect their secrets, but to protect themselves. What we found was waiting for someone to find it, waiting for someone to activate it. We were the fools who opened the door, and now it is too late to close it. I can feel it reaching out, and I know that I am not the only one. Others who were there, others who touched what we touched, they feel it too. We are marked, and we will be called when the time comes. I only hope that when that time arrives, humanity will be ready for what emerges. Unger's story, as extraordinary as it is, fits within a larger pattern of suppressed information about Antarctica that emerged during and immediately after World War II. Multiple German expeditions to Antarctica occurred between 1938 and 1943, and while some were publicly acknowledged, others operated in complete secrecy. Submarine activity in Antarctic waters during this period is well documented, with at least 7 U-boats making extended voyages to the region despite the fact that Antarctica had no strategic military value in the conventional sense. After the war, captured German scientists and officers were interrogated about Antarctic activities, and their testimony, while fragmentary and often contradictory, yet consistently references secret facilities and discoveries that went far beyond weather stations or whaling operations. Several scientists mentioned the discovery of ice-free areas warmed by geothermal heat, of caves and tunnel systems, of ruins that predated known human civilization. But whenever interrogators pressed for details, the witnesses would claim not to know specifics or would suddenly develop memory problems that prevented further discussion. The American Operation Highjump of 1946 through 47, commanded by Admiral Richard Byrd, represents the most significant post-war attempt to investigate what the Germans had been doing in Antarctica. The operation was massive, involving over 4,000 personnel, 13 ships, and extensive aircraft support. The official mission was to establish a research base and train personnel for cold weather operations. But the scale and urgency of the operation, launched barely a year after the war ended when resources were still scarce and reconstruction was a priority, suggests a more pressing objective. Admiral Byrd's public statements about the expedition included references that have fueled speculation for decades. In a press conference in Chile on his way back from Antarctica, Byrd reportedly stated that the United States needed to take defensive action against enemy fighters that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. This statement, made in 1947 about an expedition to a supposedly uninhabited frozen continent, has never been adequately explained by official sources. What enemy fighters was Byrd referring to? What did he encounter in Antarctica that prompted such an ominous warning? Operation Highjump was scheduled to last 6 to 8 months, but was terminated abruptly after only 8 weeks. The official explanation cited bad weather and equipment failures, but crews later reported that the expedition had encountered resistance, that several aircraft had been damaged or lost under mysterious circumstances, and that Admiral Byrd had been visibly shaken by something he witnessed during flights over the Antarctic interior. Like Carl Unger before him, Byrd was debriefed by intelligence officials and ordered not to discuss certain aspects of what he had seen. One of the most controversial aspects of Unger's testimony is his description of functional technology in the ancient facility beneath the Antarctic ice. If his account is accurate, should then the facility contain not just ruins but active systems that had been operating autonomously for an unknown period, possibly for thousands or even millions of years? This raises profound questions about the nature of the technology and the identity of its builders. Mainstream archaeology and anthropology reject the possibility of ancient advanced civilizations on Earth, arguing that the archaeological record shows a clear progression from primitive to advanced cultures, and that no evidence supports the existence of technological societies predating known history. But this position has been challenged by discoveries that do not fit neatly into the standard timeline. Megalithic structures around the world display construction techniques and astronomical knowledge that seem incompatible with the technological level of the cultures that supposedly built them. Artifacts that appear to be manufactured rather than natural have been found in geological strata millions of years old. And now, satellite surveys of Antarctica are revealing structures beneath the ice that appear artificial but predate human presence in the region. If we accept Unger's account as accurate, then the facility he discovered was built by a non-human intelligence or by a terrestrial species that existed before modern humans. The description of the preserved specimens being similar to humans but with different proportions and larger cranial capacity, it suggests the builders might have been a related species that evolved differently or earlier than Homo sapiens. Some researchers have speculated about the possibility of Homo sapiens not being the first intelligent hominid species. That earlier species might have achieved technological sophistication and then gone extinct or retreated underground when climate conditions changed. The idea of a facility that could operate autonomously for geological timescales is less fantastic than it might initially seem. Modern technology is moving towards self-repairing systems and AI that can maintain and upgrade itself without human intervention. A sufficiently advanced civilization could theoretically create facilities designed to operate indefinitely, powered by geothermal energy or nuclear reactions with half-lives measured in millions of years, but maintained by robotic systems that could repair themselves and each other. If such a facility existed and was sealed beneath Antarctic ice, it could indeed remain functional for enormous spans of time. But this raises the most disturbing question suggested by Unger's testimony. If the facility was waiting to be activated, waiting for someone to trigger its systems, then for what purpose? Was it a time capsule, a repository of knowledge meant to be discovered by whatever intelligent species eventually evolved or arrived on Earth? Was it a seed bank or a library, preserving information about the builders and their civilization for posterity? Or was it something more active, a beacon or a signal designed to call something or someone when activated, to alert distant observers that intelligent life had returned to Earth and achieved sufficient technology to find what had been hidden? The suppression of information about Antarctica has continued long past World War II and the early post-war expeditions. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 by 12 nations and subsequently joined by dozens more, establishes Antarctica as a scientific preserve where military activity is prohibited and territorial claims are frozen. On its face, the treaty seems like a noble effort at international cooperation and environmental protection. But examined more closely, it serves to restrict access to Antarctica and to ensure that information about discoveries there is controlled by governments rather than disseminated freely. Under the treaty, but all scientific research in Antarctica must be reported to other member nations, and inspections of research stations can be conducted to verify compliance with the treaty's terms. In practice, this means that no nation can conduct truly independent research in Antarctica without other nations knowing about it and potentially interfering. It also means that discoveries made in Antarctica are subject to international political considerations. If something is found that a government wants to keep secret, the treaty provides legal mechanisms for classification and suppression under the guise of environmental protection or security concerns. The timing of the Antarctic Treaty is significant. It was negotiated during the International Geophysical Year of 1957 through 58. And a period of intense scientific activity in Antarctica, involving researchers from multiple nations. But it was also negotiated at the height of the Cold War, when the United States and Soviet Union were in bitter ideological conflict over virtually every other issue. Yet somehow these two superpowers and their respective allies managed to agree on a comprehensive regime for managing Antarctica. This suggests that whatever they discovered or confirmed about Antarctica during the IGY was important enough to override their usual hostility and unite them in ensuring that the continent remained under international control. Researchers who study the classified portions of government archives have reported that files related to Antarctica are often more heavily restricted than files about nuclear weapons, intelligence operations, or other sensitive national security matters. Documents that would normally be declassified after 25 or 50 years remain classified indefinitely, with exemptions citing national security or international relations concerns. This level of protection suggests that information about Antarctica is considered fundamentally destabilizing, that its disclosure would have consequences that governments believe outweigh the public's right to know. In recent decades, technological advances have made Antarctic exploration less dependent on government sponsorship. Private organizations, wealthy individuals, and independent researchers have begun conducting their own expeditions and investigations, using satellite imagery, drones, and other tools that do not require massive infrastructure or official permission. This democratization of exploration has led to discoveries that challenge official narratives and raise new questions about what lies beneath the ice. Commercial satellite imagery has revealed numerous anomalies in Antarctica that appear to be artificial structures, or at minimum, formations that do not match natural geological patterns. Researchers analyzing these images have identified what appear to be pyramid-shaped peaks that are too geometrically precise to be natural mountains. They have found rectangular and circular formations beneath the ice that suggest buried buildings or facilities, and they have detected thermal hotspots that indicate geothermal activity at levels higher than volcanic processes alone would explain, raising the possibility of artificial heat sources. But when independent researchers attempt to investigate these anomalies on the ground, they encounter obstacles that suggest official resistance to discovery. Permits for Antarctic research are routinely denied for proposals that involve investigating specific sites where anomalies have been detected. Researchers who manage to reach Antarctica often find that the areas they want to investigate have been declared restricted zones for environmental or safety reasons. In several cases, researchers have reported being monitored or harassed by personnel from government research stations, suggesting that certain areas are being actively guarded against investigation. One particularly significant incident occurred in 2014 when a team of researchers from a private foundation obtained permission to conduct geological surveys in a region of Antarctica where satellite imagery had revealed unusual formations. The team set up camp and began deploying ground-penetrating radar, but their work was interrupted when officials from a nearby government research station arrived and informed them that their permits had been revoked and they needed to evacuate immediately. When the team protested and demanded explanation, they were told that a safety hazard had been discovered in the area and that it was being closed to all non-authorized personnel. The team was escorted to the coast and flown out of Antarctica. Subsequent attempts to obtain information about the nature of the safety hazard were rebuffed, and satellite imagery of the area they had been investigating became unavailable shortly after the incident. In 2017, Dr. Schneider, the researcher who had investigated Carl Unger's psychiatric confinement, published a paper presenting all the evidence she had gathered about Unger's Antarctica expedition and its aftermath. The paper was published in a specialized journal that focused on 20th century German military history, and it received little attention outside academic circles. But among those who did read it, the paper sparked intense debate and prompted several other researchers to look for additional evidence. One discovery that emerged from this renewed investigation was a set of photographs found in a private collection in Argentina that appeared to have been taken during a German Antarctic expedition. The photographs showed a submarine surfaced in what appeared to be an underground cavern, with crew members visible on the conning tower. The background of the photographs showed rocky walls and what might be structures carved into those walls, though the details were difficult to discern in the low-resolution images. The photographs were not dated, but the submarine's configuration matched U-boats from the early 1940s, and the uniforms visible on the crew members were consistent with Kriegsmarine issue from that period. The photographs had been in the possession of a family whose grandfather had emigrated from Germany to Argentina in 1946. So family history held that the grandfather had served in the German Navy during the war and had participated in a secret mission that he never discussed. Upon his death in 1998, his personal effects included these photographs, along with a diary written in German. The diary, when translated, described a submarine voyage to Antarctica and experiences that closely matched Carl Unger's testimony. The diary author did not identify himself by name, referring to himself only as an officer who had witnessed things that the world was not ready to know. Another piece of evidence came from a most unexpected source. In 2019, a climate research team working in Antarctica to study ice cores found an artifact embedded in ice at a depth that indicated it had been deposited approximately 12,000 years ago. At the end of the last ice age, the artifact was a metallic object approximately 10 centimeters long with a smooth surface and geometric patterns that were clearly artificial. Analysis showed that the metal was an alloy that did not match any naturally occurring combination and that included elements in ratios that suggested sophisticated metallurgy. The discovery should have made headlines as evidence of ancient technological civilization in Antarctica. Instead, it was quickly classified, and the research team was ordered not to discuss or publish their findings. One team member, speaking anonymously to a journalist months after the incident, stated that they had been visited by government officials who confiscated the artifact and all documentation of its discovery. But the team was told that the artifact was a piece of modern equipment that had been incorrectly dated due to contamination, and that publishing claims about ancient technology would damage their professional reputations. The team member who spoke to the journalist expressed certainty that the official explanation was false and that the artifact was exactly what it appeared to be. Proof that something with advanced metallurgical knowledge had existed in Antarctica thousands of years before modern civilization. We have journeyed from Carl Unger's debriefing in 1943 through layers of suppression, corroboration, investigation, and discovery. The evidence, while fragmentary and often contradictory, she points consistently toward a single conclusion. Something exists beneath the Antarctic ice that governments have decided the public cannot be allowed to know about. Whether that something is ruins of an ancient terrestrial civilization, evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, or technology that predates human history, the pattern of secrecy surrounding it has remained consistent for over 70 years. Carl Unger's testimony, as preserved in the partial transcript that survived when all other records were destroyed, describes a discovery that would fundamentally alter human understanding of our place in the universe. If he was telling the truth, if he and his companions found a facility built by non-human intelligence or by a species that predated modern humans, then everything we think we know about history, about evolution, and about whether we are alone in the universe would need to be reconsidered. The debriefing transcript was supposed to have been destroyed. The order for its destruction was explicit and was issued at the highest levels of Nazi command. Yet somehow it survived, buried in an archive for 63 years until a researcher stumbled across it. Was its survival mere bureaucratic incompetence, a file that slipped through the cracks when destruction orders were being executed? Or was it preserved deliberately by someone who believed that the truth should eventually come to light, that future generations deserved to know what had been discovered, regardless of what governments decided was too dangerous to reveal? We cannot know Unger's ultimate fate. The historical record goes silent after his transfer from the psychiatric facility in April of 1945. He may have died during the chaotic final days of the war, or he may have survived under a different identity, living out his days with memories that he could share with no one. The letters he wrote during his confinement suggest that by the end he had begun to doubt his own memories, to question whether what he experienced was real or the product of trauma and mental illness. This may have been the result of medical treatment deliberately designed to make him doubt himself, or it may have been a natural response to being imprisoned and told repeatedly that his experiences were delusions. But whether Unger believed himself in the end is less important than whether his account was true, and the accumulating evidence, yet from corroborating testimony to modern satellite discoveries to the pattern of suppression that continues to this day, suggests that he was describing something real. The facility beneath the ice exists or existed. The technology he described, whether ancient or alien or both, was real. And the activation of that technology, which Unger believed his team had triggered, may have set in motion events that continue to unfold even now. The final words of Unger's debriefing, cut off mid-sentence, were a warning. You do not understand what we have done. By going there, by activating those systems, we will never know what Unger was about to say. We can only observe the world that has unfolded in the 8 decades since. A world where Antarctica remains one of the most restricted and controlled territories on Earth, is where governments continue to suppress information about what lies beneath the ice, where those who get too close to the truth find their research blocked and their discoveries confiscated. The destruction of Unger's debriefing was ordered because someone believed that what it contained was too dangerous to exist. But the truth, like ice melting under geothermal heat, has a way of emerging regardless of how deeply it has been buried. Unger's testimony survived its ordered destruction. Modern technology is revealing what lies beneath the ice despite efforts to prevent such discoveries. And somewhere in the archives, in the memories of aging researchers, in the classified files that governments refuse to declassify, the complete truth about what was found in Antarctica in 1943 waits to be told. Said Carl Unger returned from Antarctica in 1943. His debriefing was destroyed. But the story does not end there. It ends with us, with our choice to continue asking questions that powerful institutions do not want answered, with our refusal to accept official explanations that do not withstand scrutiny, with our determination to uncover what has been hidden. Unger's warning echoes across 80 years. We do not understand what we have done, but perhaps if we can finally learn the full truth of what was discovered beneath the Antarctic ice, we can begin to understand. And perhaps that understanding will come in time to prepare us for whatever consequences that discovery set in motion so many decades ago, when a young German naval officer descended into the depths and activated something that had been waiting in darkness since before human memory began. What Dr. Schneider discovered during her research went beyond Carl Unger's documented confinement and the scattered evidence of the Antarctic expedition. She found hints of something more disturbing. A network of survivors from various Antarctic missions who had maintained contact with each other in the decades after the war, bound together by shared experiences that they could discuss with no one else. These men, scattered across different countries and living under various identities, apparently communicated through coded letters and occasional clandestine meetings, comparing notes about what they had witnessed and tracking developments in Antarctica that might relate to their experiences. Evidence of this network came from multiple sources. Family members of deceased expedition participants occasionally mentioned that their fathers or grandfathers had maintained correspondence with certain individuals whose identity and relationship to the family were never explained. Analysis of these letters, when families were willing to share them, revealed patterns of coded language and obscure references that suggested the writers were discussing shared experiences without stating them explicitly. Phrases like the Southern Matter remains unresolved, and the depths continue to call appeared repeatedly. Yes, along with what seemed to be warnings. Stay away from the ice, and those who go back do not return the same. One particularly revealing set of letters was discovered in an estate sale in Chile in 2011. The letters had belonged to a man who immigrated from Germany in 1947 and lived quietly in Santiago until his death in 2008. The letters, spanning from 1952 through 1996, showed correspondence with at least 7 different individuals in Germany, Argentina, and the United States. While the letters discussed seemingly mundane topics like weather and family matters, careful analysis revealed a secondary layer of meaning in which the correspondents were actually discussing Antarctica, debating whether they should reveal what they knew. He had been expressing fear about the consequences of either disclosure or continued silence. One letter from 1973, written just after the Antarctic Treaty had been renegotiated and strengthened, contained a passage that has haunted researchers. The writer, responding to another correspondent's suggestion that perhaps the time had come to tell the world what they knew, wrote, "My friend, you underestimate how far they will go to maintain the silence. 3 of our brothers who spoke too freely are now gone, their deaths attributed to natural causes, but occurring with suspicious timing and circumstance. The ice keeps its secrets, and those who guard those secrets will not hesitate to ensure that we keep ours. We were given our lives in exchange for our silence, and yet that bargain cannot be broken, while those who made it still have power." The reference to 3 brothers who died suspiciously prompted Dr. Schneider to investigate deaths among known Antarctic expedition participants in the post-war period. She identified at least 9 individuals who had been part of German Antarctic missions and who died under circumstances that, while officially ruled natural or accidental, showed patterns that suggested possible foul play. 3 died in vehicle accidents within a 6-month period in 1972 through 73. 2 died of sudden heart attacks despite having no history of cardiac problems, both within weeks of giving interviews to researchers about their wartime service. Another fell to his death from his apartment balcony in what was ruled a suicide. though family members insisted he had shown no signs of depression and had been planning a trip to visit grandchildren. The network apparently dissolved in the late 1990s as its members aged and died. The final letter in the collection from Chile, dated January 1996, reads like a farewell among old soldiers who had shared something profound but forbidden. The writer, by then in his late 70s, expressed sadness that most of his correspondents had passed away, and that soon there would be no one left who remembered what had truly happened beneath the ice. He wrote, "Perhaps it is better this way. Perhaps some secrets should die with those who discovered them. But I wonder in quiet moments whether we failed in our duty by remaining silent. If what we activated continues its work, if what we disturbed continues to awaken, then our silence may have condemned future generations to face something they do not understand and cannot prepare for. I pray that I am wrong, that what we feared would happen has not happened and will not happen, but the dreams that have haunted me for 50 years suggest otherwise." As the 21st century progressed, strange events in Antarctica began to accumulate, events that seemed to echo the fears expressed in the letters of Unger's generation. Research stations reported equipment malfunctions that had no technical explanation, with instruments recording impossible readings or shutting down in synchronization despite being independent systems. Personnel at multiple stations experienced identical vivid dreams describing vast underground spaces and machinery that seemed alive. Several researchers required psychiatric evaluation after reporting that they heard signals or voices that appeared to emanate from beneath the ice. In 2012, a seismograph network deployed across Antarctica to study tectonic activity detected a pattern of low-frequency vibrations that seemed to originate from deep beneath the ice sheet. The vibrations were regular, occurring in pulses separated by precise intervals, and they appeared to be artificial rather than natural. When researchers analyzed the pattern, they found it resembled a signal, a repeating sequence that showed mathematical structure. The pattern was reported in scientific journals, but follow-up research was mysteriously defunded, and the researchers who discovered the pattern were reassigned to different projects. The vibrations continue to this day, but no official investigation into their source or meaning has been conducted. In 2016, satellite thermal imaging detected a massive spike in heat emanating from beneath the ice in a region of Antarctica near the coordinates that Unger had provided in his letters from the psychiatric facility. The heat signature suggested geothermal activity had suddenly intensified, raising temperatures beneath the ice to levels that would create large volumes of meltwater. A research team was dispatched to investigate, but before they could reach the site, the area was declared off-limits due to ice instability. Satellite imagery of the region became restricted shortly afterward, and independent researchers found that commercial imaging services were no longer providing updated photographs of that specific area. Most disturbing were reports from commercial airline pilots who flew routes that passed near Antarctic airspace. Several pilots reported seeing lights beneath the ice, luminous phenomena that appeared to be deep underground but bright enough to be visible from aircraft flying at high altitude. The lights appeared in patterns, sometimes forming geometric shapes or moving in coordinated ways that suggested intelligence. Airlines that received these reports instructed their pilots not to discuss the sightings in rerouted flights to avoid Antarctic airspace where possible. Climate change has accelerated ice melt in Antarctica, and as the ice sheet thins and retreats, more of what lies beneath is being exposed. In 2018, a section of ice shelf collapsed, but revealing rock formations that showed clear evidence of artificial modification. The stones had been cut and shaped with precision, creating what appeared to be a platform or foundation for structures that had long since collapsed or been removed. The discovery should have been major news, archaeological evidence of civilization in Antarctica thousands of years before any humans were supposed to have reached the continent. Instead, the site was immediately restricted, and researchers who had photographed the formation found their images confiscated and their accounts of the discovery dismissed as misidentification of natural erosion patterns. Each of these incidents individually might be explainable through conventional means. Together, they form a pattern suggesting that something is happening in Antarctica, something that authorities are working desperately to conceal. The pattern matches what Unger and his fellow survivors feared, that the activation of the ancient facility had set in motion processes that would continue and intensify, that what had been dormant for countless millennia was now awake and acting with purposes that humans neither understood nor controlled. 80 years after Carl Unger's expedition, fundamental questions remain unanswered. What exactly did he and his companions find in the cavern beneath the Antarctic ice? Who or what built the facility that Unger described, and for what purpose? What did the team activate when they descended into the depths, and what consequences has that activation had for the world we live in? The partial debriefing transcript provides tantalizing fragments, but not a complete picture. Yet Unger described structures and technology that suggested non-human intelligence or a terrestrial species that predated modern humans. He spoke of preserved specimens that resembled humans but had different proportions. He witnessed systems activating after being dormant for an unknown period, but the crucial details, the information that would allow us to understand the full scope of what was discovered, are either redacted or were never recorded in the surviving documentation. We know that German authorities believed the discovery was important enough to warrant extreme secrecy. Multiple expeditions were sent to Antarctica during the war, despite the enormous demands on German resources from fighting on multiple fronts. Personnel who participated in these expeditions were systematically silenced through various means, from execution to institutionalization to forced relocation. After the war, Allied authorities showed intense interest in what the Germans had found, mounting their own expeditions and interrogating German scientists and officers about Antarctic activities. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 created a legal framework that has effectively prevented independent investigation of the continent for over 60 years. While presented as environmental protection and international scientific cooperation, the treaty functions as a control mechanism, ensuring that only approved research occurs and that any discoveries made are subject to governmental oversight and potential suppression. So the fact that Cold War enemies could agree on this framework when they could agree on virtually nothing else suggests that Antarctica contains something that all major powers recognize as requiring management and control. Modern technology has begun to pierce the veil of secrecy through satellite observation and remote sensing. The anomalies detected, from geometric formations beneath the ice to unexplained heat sources to artificial-seeming structures, all support the possibility that Unger's testimony was accurate. But each time evidence emerges that might confirm his account, that evidence is quickly classified or explained away, and those who attempt to investigate further find themselves blocked by official resistance. The question of what activated in 1943 remains most disturbing. If Unger and his team truly triggered ancient systems that had been dormant, and if those systems are still operating or have continued to activate in the decades since, then we may be living through the consequences of that activation without recognizing it. The increasing anomalies detected in Antarctica, the strange events reported by researchers and pilots, the patterns of seismic activity and thermal changes. All of these could be indicators that something beneath the ice is becoming more active, drawing closer to some threshold or completion of some process that was set in motion 80 years ago. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of Carl Unger's story is that his warning went unheeded. From his debriefing, from his letters written during psychiatric confinement, from the coded correspondence of the survivor network, as a consistent message emerges. Humanity had discovered something in Antarctica that it was not ready for, that the discovery had consequences that could not be predicted or controlled, and that the wisest course would have been to seal the facility and never return. But that warning was ignored. Instead of sealing the facility, expeditions continued. German missions during the war, Allied missions after the war, and ongoing research activities throughout the Cold War period and into the present all have probed deeper into Antarctic mysteries. The public is told these are scientific research missions studying climate, geology, and Antarctic ecosystems. But the pattern of secrecy, the restrictions on access, the suppression of discoveries that challenge official narratives, that all suggest that the real purpose of continued Antarctic presence is to monitor and possibly attempt to control whatever was activated in 1943. The hubris of believing that we can understand and control technology or systems created by an intelligence far older or more advanced than our own may prove to be humanity's fatal flaw. Unger recognized this in his debriefing when he spoke of being fools to disturb what had been left undisturbed for so long. The elder scientist on his expedition recognized it when he recommended that the facility be sealed and never visited again. The Survivor Network recognized it in their private correspondence when they debated whether revealing the truth would help or harm humanity's prospects for surviving what might be coming. But recognition without action is meaningless. But those who knew the truth were silenced, institutionalized, scattered, and told that their experiences were delusions or that speaking about them would be treason. Those who suspected the truth but lacked direct evidence were dismissed as conspiracy theorists or attention seekers, and those who had the power to take action, the governments and military organizations with the resources to properly investigate and possibly remediate what had been triggered, chose instead to keep the matter classified and hope that whatever had been activated would remain manageable. We now approach a moment of potential revelation, whether by intention or by accident. Climate change is melting Antarctic ice at accelerating rates, exposing what has been hidden for millennia. So commercial satellites can observe Antarctica with resolution that makes hiding surface features increasingly difficult. Private organizations have resources to mount independent expeditions that governments cannot easily control. And the generation that directly participated in the events of the 1940s is gone, taking with them the personal connections and loyalties that might have helped maintain silence. What will be revealed when the ice can no longer conceal what lies beneath? Will we discover ruins that confirm the existence of ancient civilization in Antarctica? Will we find technology that could advance our own capabilities or destroy us if misused? Will we learn that Unger's warning was accurate and that we have been living on borrowed time since 1943? That something has been building or awakening beneath the ice for 80 years and is now approaching completion. Carl Unger returned from Antarctica in March of 1943. He reported what he had seen and experienced to naval intelligence officers who recognized that his testimony was either the ravings of a madman or evidence of a discovery so profound that it threatened the foundations of everything humans thought they knew about their world and their place in it. Rather than investigate further or attempt to verify his claims through additional expeditions, they chose the easier path: declare him insane, lock him away, destroy his testimony, and continue with the war effort as though the expedition had never occurred. But the truth has a way of surviving destruction. Yet the debriefing transcript that should have been burned survived in an archive for 63 years. The network of survivors who should have remained silent left letters and coded messages that survived them. The facility beneath the ice that should have remained dormant activated and apparently continues to operate, creating anomalies that cannot be completely suppressed despite governmental efforts. And now, we who have pieced together the fragments of Unger's story face a choice similar to the one those interrogators faced in 1943. We can dismiss this account as the ravings of a traumatized mind, as conspiracy theory unsupported by credible evidence, as the result of misinterpreting fragmentary documents and seeing patterns where only randomness exists. We can trust that governments have thoroughly investigated Antarctica and found nothing more extraordinary than ice, rock, and the remnants of ancient geological processes. We can accept official explanations for every anomaly and every suppressed discovery, believing that restrictions on Antarctic access are purely about environmental protection and international cooperation. Or we can accept that the evidence, fragmentary though it is, points towards something real. We can recognize that the pattern of secrecy surrounding Antarctica is inconsistent with the official narrative of a frozen wasteland of purely scientific interest. We can acknowledge that Unger's testimony, corroborated by survivor accounts and modern discoveries, describes something that deserves serious investigation rather than dismissal. And we can demand that the full truth about what was discovered in Antarctica, what was activated in 1943, and what continues to occur beneath the ice be revealed so that humanity can make informed decisions about how to respond. The destruction of Unger's debriefing was intended to erase his story from history, to ensure that what he witnessed would remain secret and that the implications of his discovery would never be widely known. But that destruction failed. We know his story now. We know that something exists beneath Antarctic ice that predates human civilization. We know that it was discovered by German forces during World War II, and that the discovery was deemed so sensitive that systematic efforts were made to suppress all information about it. We know that American and Allied forces mounted their own expeditions to investigate, and that those investigations led not to public disclosure, but to the creation of an international treaty system designed to control access to Antarctica. Most critically, we know that whatever was found in 1943 is not merely historical artifact, but something active, something that responds to human presence and intervention, something that may continue to operate according to purposes we do not understand. Carl Unger tried to warn us. His warning was destroyed. But the truth survives, and with it the question that has haunted every generation since Unger descended into the depths. What have we awakened, and what will it mean for humanity's future when it fully emerges from beneath the ice? The Antarctic ice is melting. Yet the secrets it has preserved for thousands of years will soon be exposed. And when that happens, we will learn whether Carl Unger's debriefing, the testimony that was supposed to have been destroyed, was the terrified delusion of a broken mind or an accurate prophecy of humanity's encounter with something we were never meant to find, something that will change everything we thought we knew about who we are and where we came from. The truth lies beneath the ice, waiting in the darkness as it has waited for countless ages, patient and inexorable as the geological forces that have preserved it. And soon, very soon, that waiting will end.